My name is Alex Dworjan. I'm an Ansible specialist, and today I'm going to be walking through how I can do command line testing of event-driven Ansible. So why do I care about performing command line testing of event-driven Ansible and Ansible-Rulebook? So really my goal is to speed up my development process as much as possible. If you have event-driven Ansible controller already deployed today, you may be familiar with the making changes to your rulebook, pushing that to your repository, syncing that project into event-driven Ansible controller, and restarting your rulebook activation. Definitely not the quickest and most efficient process, especially if you're trying to get a source plugin tested for the first time or figure out the JSON payload that's getting sent from a webhook that you may not be familiar with. So it's much easier to do this all locally so I can see exactly what those outputs would be, make those changes, and push those to my source control repository once I've already verified that things are working correctly. So whether I'm just using a basic playbook to do that testing or using the debug action, it will significantly speed up those processes, and I'll show both those options when I go through a demonstration here in a second. So what am I actually going to install and how would I leverage this? So I can install Ansible-Rulebook via RPM or via pip, but for my particular example, I'm actually going to leverage the decision environment that I've created. Similar to using Ansible Navigator and my execution environments, I want to use the exact same environment for my CLI testing as I'm going to do in production. So I'm going to leverage Podman to do that capability and leverage my custom decision environment that I've created, but I can also use the min decision environment or supported decision environment provided by Red Hat. You can also use a dev container if that's something that you're familiar with. I'm not going to walk through that in this process, but it does provide similar capability where I do my development inside that dev container, which would have to have Ansible-Rulebook installed. So this is the actual command that I'm going to run in order to have my decision environment available for testing. So just leveraging Podman run. Obviously, Docker run would work as well if you have Docker on your particular virtual machine or environment. The -it is to have an interactive terminal stood up so it can accept standard in and I can see the output as it goes through. The -rm is once I exit out of that container, it'll clean it up so I don't have to go into Podman or Docker PS, find the container and delete it. It'll handle that process for me. -v is to mount a volume. So in this case, I'm mounting my local /EDA folder into /temp/rulebook. I have the :z at the end because I'm running SC Linux. If you don't do that, you'll get permission issues when we actually try to run the rulebook or connect to a playbook inside the container image. So it's important to keep that in mind if you do have SC Linux enabled on the virtual machine that you're running testing on. I then want to map a specific port because in my case, I'm actually running a webhook using the webhook source plugin. So I'm mapping port 2000 to port 2000. If you are just using a URL check or something like that for your source, or you're maybe leveraging Kafka as your source, you would not need that, but just want to show the full capability that's there. I'm then using my specific decision environment that I've custom created. So that's additional plugins that are necessary for me, like Dynatrace or Datadog. So I've got my specific custom image. Then it really is just the Ansible-Rulebook command. So Ansible-Rulebook passing in my specific rulebook, which in this case is my webhook.yml. And then I'm passing in an inventory, which is just localhost for me because that's essentially what event-driven Ansible controller is using anyway. And then I want additional verbosity so I can see exactly what's going on within that decision environment. You can also add in print events if you want to see the specific events, but this for me does really what I need to leverage in terms of decision environments and testing. So let's jump into a command line to see how this works, and then I'll pass through some specific tests to see exactly what's going on. So as you can see, I already have the command pasted into my terminal, so it's ready to run that podman run command, mapping in my local volume, mapping to port 2000 because I'm leveraging the webhook source plugin. It's going to use my local decision environment, and then it's running the Ansible-Rulebook command with a specific rulebook and playbook that I've got set up internally, but I'll show that in a second. And I do specifically have the -vv so I can see, as it's getting stood up, make sure that it's providing the specific port, and it is listening and ready to go, similar to the output that you would see in event-driven Ansible controller, that everything is actually up and running. So I can see it's waiting for actions and it's waiting for events. So I'm going to switch to a separate tab, and all I'm going to do is run a very basic curl command with a message that says EDA is running. And I'm going to push that to localhost port 2000 because that's where I have it actually listening. So I've run that command, and I can see as I switch back, I can see exactly that single event, and I'm just using the debug capability, so the debug action. So just going to print out that payload for me. So if I need to go through the process of trying to parse through what that event may look like, I know it's event.payload.message should be EDA is running. So this gives me a very quick and easy way to test what the payload would be, so I can start mapping out variables if I need to pass them to job templates or workflow job templates. So I'm just going to exit out of this particular run. So that's going to exit out of that container so I don't have to worry about it. And I'm going to switch to my webhook with a playbook option. So this, conveniently enough, has a playbook that's going to run something very similar, but it's just going to push the event to a playbook, which is just doing a debug in the playbook of a single variable, which in this case is that event.payload.message. And I'll show that in a second. But first, I just want to rerun that curl command. And I can see in here, it's actually going to run that playbook, and it's going to run that debug to say EDA is running. So what does that look like from a standpoint on this side? So as you can see, this is that original webhook.yml. So I'm just listening for anything on port 2000, and I'm using the catch-all event.payload is defined, and I'm just doing the debug. So this is a quick and easy way to see all the events that are coming in and all the actual information that's being passed by that particular webhook. Same thing would apply if I'm listening to a Kafka topic or a messaging bus, but this is a quick and easy way to get started and start parsing through that JSON to figure out what I want to use as a condition. The inventory I kept very basic. I'm just using localhost because I'm not actually running automation on any end system. This is essentially all that event-driven Ansible controller is doing anyway, so I want to keep that similar functionality. For the debug.yml, this is just that playbook, so I was able to take EDA message, and I'll show how I'm doing that on the other side. Because when I write my rule books, I don't try to take that full payload. I only try to pass specific information to that end playbook. So this debug is just looking for EDA message. And then that webhook with playbook, I'm actually doing the action of run playbook because that playbook is being mounted into my decision environment. And I'm passing specifically an extra var of EDA message, which is event.payload.message, which I can easily see exist by looking through this debug output. I can see event.payload.message EDA is running, which is exactly why I got this output. So quick and easy way to do that initial check to see what the payload is, and then start going through and verifying that my variable parsing is correct, so I'm getting the exact output I need. So if I need to get a particular VM or particular part of that webhook, I can do all this testing before I ever push it into my repository and pull it into event-driven Ansible controller. So again, this is a good way to do some of that localized testing to speed up your processes. So now that you've seen an example of how I can run Ansible-Rulebook and do some of my testing via decision environment, some of the next steps you can start looking through are the actual rulebook documentation. So this will give you the different actions that are available to you. In my case, I just use the debug action as well as the run playbook option, but there's certainly additional ones well outside of that. I'll also include a blog on some of the more detailed aspects of Ansible-Rulebook. So if you've got questions about what it is, some of the different actions that's contained in there. I will also include in the description down below the specific command that I ran for Podman as well as that curl command. So you've got a good example to get started with, and certainly need to modify that to match your specific decision environment and maybe the specific ports that you want to map to. So thank you for taking the time to learn a little bit more about how I can do command line testing of event-driven Ansible and Ansible rulebooks leveraging decision environments. Click my picture on the right to subscribe, or click the image on the left to watch another video.